So today I guess I want to talk about some problems that I've seen with a lot of different DPS players in competitive, from gameplay to attitude to all of that. Personally myself, I'm a tank main. I have a decent amount of time on DPS, but definitely not my main role. But I just wanted to, I guess, go over some of the things I think a lot of people could work on as DPS players. And keep in mind that this doesn't apply to every single DPS player. I know that there are a lot of people that are great at DPS, really friendly players. I've had a lot in my own games. It's just that I've also had a lot of other players that aren't quite as nice, and DPS, at least for me, has been the role that has kind of supplied those comments more than anyone else. With all that said, guys, let's get started right here. So I think the most obvious thing, at least for me in a lot of my games, has been chat. And I think there's a lot of DPS players that just are not the most friendly people in the game, especially when you're losing, but even sometimes when you're winning. And again, I know that this doesn't apply to every single player, and it will be very subjective based off the game that you're playing. But for me, most of the time, support players don't really say anything. Tank players usually say callouts, but that's about it. And DPS players are the ones talking up in the comms the majority of the time. And maybe it's because personality brings it to certain characters, or I don't really know. There could be a lot of different reasons. Maybe it's how the DPS role just kind of changes you as a person. I have no idea. But it seems like in a lot of cases, they're just people that go into chat, start flaming you, and a lot of times they're kind of DPS. And it seems like in a lot of cases, there's just so many DPS players that want to win so bad and that want to carry that game so bad, and they get so tilted when they lose that match. And I think it's often not even because the player, because, you know, everybody of every different type of emotional state and every single type of personality will eventually be playing DPS, but I think it's really the pressure that the role brings. When you're playing DPS, I think most people expect a lot out of themselves and expect a lot out of their team. I mean, they're doing damage, they're getting picks, their team should be winning. And a lot of the times when that isn't happening, DPS just start going off on teammates here and there. Whoever's not doing the best right there, whoever they can kind of pinpoint as one of the weak points on your team. And as far as this goes, if you seem to be one of those players that does that all the time, realize that by complaining to your team so much and by yelling at them, you're actually just increasing the chance of losing that game. You might be one of the people on your team that wants to win the most, but by doing this, you're decreasing your chance the most compared to everybody else. Now, of course, again, I do hear a decent amount of angry tank players thinking that their teammates are never playing behind them. That happens a lot. And a lot of supports that are just pissed because they're DPS and the tanks are pushing way too far up. But as far as my experience goes, for the majority of the games, I see the DPS flaming other people first, for whatever reason it is. And maybe that's just what I've been seeing the most, but I think it's something that you should really try to work at, because if you are a player that wants to win games and get better and, you know, improve your win rate and, you know, going like that, being nice to your teammates, or at least not being rude to them, will increase your chances. Because if you're just yelling in comms, you're just increasing the amount of tilt on your team, and you're essentially doing nothing for yourself but decreasing your chance of winning. I guess that's a good way to kind of keep it in your mind. And as well, if you think of, you know, you're just giving constructive criticism all the time, really think about your criticism. And if you're just saying you're completely terrible at healing, that's not going to really help them. Try to think of, I guess, something else that could help them maybe a little bit more. So I'm going to stop talking about voice cons right here because, yeah, it does kind of apply to everyone. I just thought DPS are the ones that I personally see that it applies to the most. But another thing right here that I think applies specifically to DPS is something that I think the community has kind of just fostered throughout time. And that's the idea that DPS can carry every single game, and that you should and will be able to carry every single game as a DPS player. And if you're a player that plays a different role, if you go into DPS, you're going to eventually get to the highest ranks faster than everyone else. And yeah, I'm going to agree, playing DPS has the highest possibility of carrying. And if you really are way better than everyone else, as you see in a lot of these pro streams, you're going to climb super quickly. But a thing you have to keep in mind, and the thing that I think a lot of DPSs don't keep in mind, is that you can't always carry a game. In a lot of cases, DPS players aren't good enough to carry the game that they're in. They're just good enough to be an average DPS player there. And I think just most people don't want to agree with that fact and don't want to accept that, but that's how it is for a lot of players. I mean, if you've been playing in Platinum, Diamond, Bronze, Silver, or whatever for like 100 games, it should be pretty obvious that, yes, you are good at that level. You are good enough to stay there, no matter the team comp, no matter what's going on. You're good enough for that. But it also shows that you aren't some magical god that can carry every single game. And I know a lot of people would like to believe that, but really, I think you're going to have to go back to the drawing board, go back to how to improve yourself, and play to get better instead of playing to gain rank. And that's the only really thing I can tell you here. Just realize that, yeah, it is possible to carry every single game as a DPS player if you are the best, but for most players, I don't think it's possible for them to particularly carry every single game. So there we go with that. I guess a different problem right here that also kind of applies to that is that when you look at the top ranks, oftentimes you will see quad DPS, triple DPS every single game. And yes, if you are just god tier DPS again, you still can win, you know, whatever your team comp is. It honestly doesn't really matter when you're good enough, when you can use your mobility, use your positioning, get damage, get picks, all of that. But I think a problem that comes from watching all these top tier players and all their top tier streams is that it makes regular DPS very unlikely to switch. Not even switch off a DPS, but just switch to another DPS character. Sometimes, even if you're playing triple DPS on your team, maybe you need something else. Maybe they have a Pharaoh that's just completely stomping your Junkrat, let's say Mei, Reaper comp, and you have to go something like Widow or McCree, but you just don't want to. I think that's another problem that happens a lot with DPS, where you pick your character and you want to only play them. And while that can sometimes work, I guess, if you become super good at them compared to everyone else in your rank, realize that if you aren't at that level yet, it would really be nice to your team if you could maybe switch up a little bit more and help your team in that way. And I guess that's another problem that I see a lot of DPS doing, just not really knowing when to switch, I guess, or not really wanting to switch in the first place. And sometimes I do see some DPS switch, though, and I'm not going to throw them all under the bus. There are a decent amount of DPS players that will realize that, hey, I'm not doing way too great this game, or hey, our team comp is completely abysmal, let's switch it up. Yesterday I even saw a quad DPS comp on the enemy team. They started losing and they switched to 2 tanks, so that was pretty cool. But one thing I'm going to say right here is that DPS players, oftentimes, when they switch, don't really know what to do as far as positioning goes, even after they switch. And I guess this is a problem that every other player on your team should try to help you do better at. Because if you're a DPS player, a lot of you guys will go out really far, go for picks, or play super far behind. But when you're playing support and tank, their positioning is a lot different. And I think that kind of creates a problem when DPS mains even try to play other roles. A good thing about DPS mains playing other roles is that, yeah, they do have good mechanical skill, they can get picks a lot more often than other people, but again, their positioning's just kind of out of whack. If that does happen to you, though, and you have a DPS player that is kind enough to switch, try to call out for where they should stand, try to call out for where they should play, and how to position a little bit better, because a lot of them will actually listen to you. I guess that's a problem about DPS, but also a way that we can fix that. If you are a main that's playing competitive, and if you're a DPS main yourself and you decide to fill a game, maybe ask for your team to help you out, know where to stand, know where to play, and hopefully you'll have a tank player that can kind of help you in that way. So I guess that's another thing that I think could be kind of nice for you. I have 2 more things that I want to talk about, though, and here's the first one of those. I think that in Overwatch, we can generally agree that DPS is usually the most fun class to play, and at least by player base and by player count, who people are maining, DPS is the most played class in the game. And I think a problem about that for competitive is that there's just so many DPS mains in competitive, and by that alone, it creates a problem where DPS players kind of screw other DPS players. I mean, when you're a tank player or you're a support player, you can kind of get in there, you can play, and for the majority of your games, you should be able to get your hero or at least get your role. But if you're a DPS player and you want to actually fit in the team comp, you're going to have to switch quite often or insta-lock and hope somebody else does. And I think that kind of creates a problem for a lot of DPS mains, not, you know, them being the problem, but just a problem for them, because how do you deal with this? I think a really big problem about, I guess, Overwatch in general is that it is hard to make a team comp around these players. It is hard to get the role that you want to play, especially if you are DPS. And a lot of the times, complaining to your team that you have a bad team comp or that you play DPS, you know, like 5 games ago, that's not really going to change them. It's not really going to change anything. And I guess a way we could fix this is by adding a role queue, by adding a guild queue, by adding something, but it seems like that is never going to really happen. And for DPS players, I'm just kind of sorry that that's how it is. I hope that we can find a way to fix this in the future, but I think that is a problem for a lot of DPS mains. It's hard to get your role, and even if you do, you're probably going to play it in a pretty bad situation. But in general, that's all I'm going to say today about DPS players and some problems about them, and I guess some problems for them. You know, just kind of going over everything with DPS players in today's video. For myself, I've had a lot of good DPS players in the past, so don't get worried. I still do realize that they can do a lot in your game. They still can carry your game. There's a lot of them that are very friendly. There's a lot of them that just create a good experience, or at least don't tilt you off the stratosphere. So if you see any comments that say, you know, I just hate DPS mains, that's not really the problem. I just wanted to talk about some of the main problems with a good group of them and how they could kind of maybe fix some of those problems so that it could be a lot more pleasant to play with a lot of DPS mains, because I think, you know, in the majority of situations, these are good people. They're just in, I guess, a bad situation or just not responding the best, and yeah, whatever. I wanted to get my opinion about that today to you guys. Anyways, as always, guys, though, thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. If you have your own experiences or opinions, please leave those down in the comment section down below. Press that subscribe button to see more videos like this in the future, or like button if you want to, you know, see more like this, and if you want to support this video. And as always, guys, though, thank you all for watching, and have a wonderful day.